Get your hands off that chair before I have you thrown out of this building." Grant Ashworth's voice cracked across the ballroom like a whip, and every head within 30 feet turned toward table 1. The man he was pointing at didn't flinch. He simply looked down at the fingers gripping his shoulder, then back up at Grant's face, calm as still water. Behind him, a crystal flute tipped off the edge of the table and shattered against the marble, and somewhere, a woman gasped as if the broken glass mattered more than the man being shoved. "Disgusting," said Paula Ashworth, wrinkling her nose and pressing a napkin to her lips like she'd caught a whiff of something rotten. "He smells like he walked here." "I was invited to this table," the man said quietly. "My name is on the card." "Invited." Grant repeated the word and laughed, a short, ugly bark that bounced off the gold-leafed ceiling. "Nobody invites trash to sit at table 1. You should be out in the parking lot with the valets, not breathing on our silverware." "Security," Paula called, already lifting 2 fingers and snapping them in the air like she was hailing a waiter. "Get this thing away from our table. It's contaminating the air, please," the man said, still low. "I have a place card. If there's confusion, we can ask the coordinator." "Shut your mouth," Grant said and shoved him again, harder this time, hard enough that the man had to catch the back of his chair to keep from stumbling. "Animals don't talk at this table." The man straightened his jacket. He bent down, picked up the broken stem of his own glass with 2 fingers, set it gently on the linen, and walked away without a single word. Nobody in that ballroom, not one of the 412 guests seated beneath those chandeliers, could have imagined what was about to happen to Grant and Paula Ashworth in the next 90 minutes. Some of them would spend the rest of their lives wishing they had looked away sooner. Others would spend it wishing they hadn't looked away at all. 4 hours earlier, in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the west side of Atlanta, Marcus Bell stood in front of a bathroom mirror, straightening a navy suit he had owned for 8 years. There was no designer label stitched into the collar. There was no pocket square, no cufflinks, nothing that announced money the way money likes to announce itself. On his left wrist sat a scratched steel watch with a cracked leather band, worn soft from 3 decades of use before it had ever reached him. His mother, Eleanor Bell, had given it to him the week before she died, and it had never once left his wrist since. Eleanor Bell had worked the night shift at Baptist Memorial in Memphis for 26 years. She raised Marcus alone in a 2-room apartment with a space heater that only worked in one corner. No child support, no safety net, nothing but double shifts and a kitchen table, where she taught her son to read balance sheets out of the newspaper, while the other kids on the block played stickball until the streetlights came on. She used to say that numbers didn't lie to you the way people did. Numbers just told you where you stood, and it was up to you what you did about it. Marcus didn't go to an Ivy League school. He went to a state college on a partial scholarship, worked the overnight stock shift at a grocery store to cover the rest, and graduated with a finance degree and $11,000 in debt. He failed the CFA exam twice before he passed it on the 3rd try, sitting in a public library, because his apartment didn't have air conditioning, and the heat made it impossible to concentrate. By the time he was 29, he had saved $43,000 over 7 years of 16-hour days at a 3rd-tier brokerage in Charlotte, and he used every dollar of it to start Bell Horizon Capital. 19 banks turned him down before the 20th one, gave him a business line of credit he didn't really need, just to prove he could get one. 26 venture firms passed on partnering with him. A black man from Memphis with no family name, no country club membership, no uncle on a board somewhere. The industry had 100 polite ways of saying no, and Marcus heard every single one of them. So he stopped asking the doors that wouldn't open and built his own. He found the founders everyone else had written off, a single mother running a logistics startup out of her garage in Birmingham. Two brothers from Detroit building supply chain software nobody in Silicon Valley wanted to look at. An immigrant engineer in Tulsa, with a patent and no capital. He invested early, held on through the bad quarters, and never once panicked when the market turned. By the time he was 37, Bell Horizon Capital managed $420 million in assets. Forbes ran one profile on him. He turned down the follow-up interview because, in his words, the work should speak, not the writer. Tonight, he was in Atlanta for the Ashcroft Foundation's annual charity gala at the Grand Cavendish Hotel in Buckhead. 400 guests, black tie, the kind of night where senators shook hands with hedge fund managers over shrimp cocktails, and everybody performed generosity for 2 hours before going home. Marcus had been invited because his firm was the platinum sponsor of the evening. His name printed on the program, listed on the official seating chart, engraved on a crystal plaque sitting on a velvet stand behind the stage curtain. Waiting to be presented later that night. None of the 7 other guests at Table 1 knew any of that yet, and, in about 90 minutes, that gap between what they assumed and what was true would detonate in front of every camera in the room. The ballroom of the Grand Cavendish was built to make people feel small in the presence of money. 16 crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling, painted in gold leaf. The carpet was so thick it swallowed footsteps whole. Waiters in white gloves moved silently between tables with trays of champagne and Wagyu tartare on black slate, and the air smelled like orchids, old money, and the faint chemical sweetness of expensive perfume trying too hard. At the center of the room sat Table 1, the VIP table, closest to the stage, reserved for the 8 guests the foundation considered its most important donors of the year. Marcus had been assigned seat 3. Among the other 7 expected at that table were Grant and Paula Ashworth. Grant Ashworth, 52, was the co-founder and chief executive of Solara Dynamics, an artificial intelligence company that had burned through $94 million of venture capital in 4 years and was now desperately chasing a $210 million Series C round. To keep the lights on, he wore a $14,000 Brioni suit, a rose gold Rolex Daytona, and the permanent expression of a man who had never once in his life been told no by anyone who mattered. He'd grown up in Winnetka, Illinois, private tennis lessons, a lake house every summer, and a father who'd bought him out of 2 DUIs before he turned 25. Paula Ashworth, 49, was the company's chief operating officer and Grant's wife of 21 years. She wore a custom emerald gown, diamond earrings worth more than most people's cars, and a smile that could freeze a glass of champagne solid from across the room. Paula collected status the way other women collected shoes, ruthlessly and without a shred of apology. She had a habit of scanning every room she entered and ranking each person in it by net worth within the first 30 seconds, and she rarely bothered to hide when she'd finished the math. Together, Grant and Paula knew their company's survival now depended on a single investor, a mysterious backer their chief financial officer had spent 4 months negotiating with, whose identity they had never been told. All they knew was that without that money, Solara Dynamics would be filing for bankruptcy by New Year's Eve. Marcus arrived at the gala at 7:15. He handed his coat to the attendant, took a glass of sparkling water off a passing tray, and walked to Table 1. He sat, opened the program, and began to read. 14 minutes later, the Ashworths walked in. Grant spotted the man at Table 1 before he'd even cleared the velvet rope. He grabbed Paula's arm. "Who is that?" Paula squinted through the chandelier light. A black man in a plain navy suit, sitting alone at their table, reading the gala program like he owned it. No watch worth mentioning, no cufflinks, nothing that read as money to a woman who had built her entire personality around reading it. "Maybe he's lost," Paula said, and adjusted her posture the way she always did before a fight, the way a cobra lifts its head before it strikes. They crossed the ballroom floor together. Grant's shoes clicked against the marble with the rhythm of a man who had never once questioned his right to any room he walked into. Paula trailed half a step behind, scanning Marcus the way a health inspector scans a kitchen, hunting for a violation to write up. Marcus looked up as they approached and smiled politely. "Good evening." Grant didn't smile back. He planted himself directly over Marcus, close enough that his shadow swallowed the table, setting whole. "You're in our seats." "I don't believe so," Marcus said, and lifted the small card in front of him. "Seat 3. Marcus Bell." Grant didn't look at the card. He looked at the suit, the plain tie, the scratched watch, and made his calculation in under 2 seconds. "I don't care who handed you that. This table is for principal donors, people who actually fund this event." He leaned in until Marcus could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Not people who serve the food at it." "There might be some confusion," Marcus said, setting the card back down without raising his voice. "If you'd like, we can find the event coordinator and clear it up in 30 seconds. Paula cut him off before he finished the sentence. She pulled out the chair beside him, the one assigned to her, and inspected the cushion like he might have left a stain on it. Then, she pulled a silk handkerchief from her clutch and wiped down the armrest slowly, deliberately, making absolutely certain he watched her do it. "The only confusion," she said loudly enough for 3 surrounding tables to hear, "is why security hasn't already dragged this out of here. This. Not him. This." She didn't sit. She stood behind the chair with her arms folded, staring at Marcus the way someone stares at a stray dog that wandered into a 5-star kitchen. The couple assigned to seats 5 and 6 arrived a moment later. Owen and Denise Whitcomb, old friends of the Ashworths from a country club outside Chicago. Denise clocked the tension instantly, looked at Marcus, looked at Paula, and picked a side inside of 1 second. "Is there a problem?" she asked, directed entirely at Paula, as though the chair Marcus sat in were empty air. "Just a seating mix-up," Paula said, pitched for the room now. "Someone from the staff seems to think he belongs at the donor table." "Oh my." Denise pressed a hand to her chest. "How did he even get past the door?" "They need to check IDs at the entrance," Owen said, shaking his head. "This is exactly how things go missing at these events." Missing. The word landed on the table like a slap, and everyone heard it land, including Marcus, whose hands stayed flat and still on the white linen. His jaw tightened once and only once, but he didn't raise his voice. "I'm not part of the staff. I was invited." "Invited?" Grant repeated, delighted, like he'd been waiting all night for the punchline. He turned to Owen. "Can you believe this? Next thing you know, the valets will be ordering the filet mignon." Owen laughed. Denise covered her mouth, though her eyes were smiling wide open behind her hand. A woman at the neighboring table turned to watch, wineglass frozen halfway to her lips, and Grant, satisfied he now had an audience worth performing for, pulled out his phone and dialed the event coordinator directly. "Simon, Grant Ashworth, Table 1. We have a situation. Get over here now." Simon Reyes appeared within 90 seconds, a thin man in his mid-50s with a clipboard he clutched like a life raft. He was the Ashcroft Foundation's event director, and his entire job that evening depended on making sure every donor worth more than $50 million felt like royalty. "Mr. Ashworth, how can I?" "This man," Grant said, pointing at Marcus without looking at him, the way you point at a stain on the carpet. "He's in the VIP section without authorization." "Fix it." Simon looked at Marcus, then at his clipboard. His finger traced down the seating chart, and something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, and right behind it, alarm. But Grant wasn't watching Simon's face. He was watching Paula, who was watching Marcus, who was watching no one at all. "Mr. Ashworth, I believe there may be a mistake in the—" Simon started. "Simon." Grant's voice dropped low, the flat, controlled tone of a man who had fired 17 people in a single afternoon and slept like a baby that same night. "I have donated $340,000 to this foundation over the last 4 years. I am not asking you to check a clipboard. I am telling you to handle this right now." Simon's throat worked as he swallowed. The clipboard trembled in his hand. He looked at Marcus with an expression that said everything his mouth wouldn't. "I know this is wrong. I know exactly who's at fault here, and I cannot afford to lose this job." "Sir," he said quietly, "would you consider relocating to another table, just to avoid any further disruption?" "He's asking you to move," Grant said. "So move, before I have security carry you out. And trust me, that would be a great deal less dignified." "Dignified?" Paula laughed. "That's generous, Grant. Look at him." Marcus looked at Simon, and Simon looked away, and Marcus understood exactly what kind of man he was looking at. Not a villain, a coward, the kind the world manufactures by the millions, the kind who knows precisely what's right and calculates the cost of doing it, and decides every time that it's too expensive. "Which table?" Marcus asked quietly. "Table 19, sir," Simon said, relief flooding visibly into his shoulders. "It's very pleasant, near the terrace doors." Table 19 was the back of the room, behind a marble column, wedged next to the service station, where the waitstaff stacked empty trays between courses. Everyone in that ballroom knew exactly what Table 19 meant. It was where you put the people you wanted to disappear. Marcus stood. He folded his napkin with steady hands and set it beside his untouched glass. "Thank you for your time," he said to Simon. Then he turned to Grant, and their eyes held for exactly 3 seconds. Grant expected anger. He expected the broken posture of a man who'd just been humiliated in public and wanted nothing more than to vanish. What he got instead was stillness, absolute, unreadable stillness, the kind that dropped the temperature at that table by 10 degrees. Marcus turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet, past table after table of people who had watched the entire exchange and said nothing. Not one of them stood. Not one of them asked, "Does anyone know who that is?" Because none of them did, and none of them cared enough to ask. Behind him, Paula sat down and ran her palm over the armrest one more time. "Finally," she said, raising her champagne toward Denise. "Now we can enjoy the evening like civilized people." Grant adjusted his Rolex and settled into his chair. "Some people just don't understand where they belong." "The world's gone soft," Owen agreed. "No standards left anywhere." Near table 20, a part-time caterer named Talia Nguyen watched the man in the navy suit walk toward the back of the room, carrying a tray of champagne flutes she'd forgotten she was holding. She was 28, working her 3rd gala shift that month to cover the cost of her daughter's after-school program, and she had heard every single word from where she stood refilling water glasses. Her hands were shaking so badly, the flutes on her tray clinked against each other. She set the tray down, poured a glass of sparkling water instead, and followed him. "Sir," she caught up to him near the service corridor, "I'm so sorry about what happened. Can I get you anything?" Marcus turned, and for the first time all evening, something shifted in his face. Not anger, not self-pity. Recognition. The particular recognition of one invisible person seeing another invisible person and choosing, quietly, to say you exist. "I see you." "Thank you," he said. "What's your name, Talia?" "Thank you, Talia." He took the water and walked to the bar at the far end of the room, where he sat on a stool facing the empty stage. He pulled out his phone. There was an email waiting from his chief legal counsel, sent 2 hours earlier, subject line reading Solara Dynamics, Series C term sheet, 210 million. Final review. He read it once, locked the screen, and set the phone face down on the bar top. Behind the stage curtain, a crystal plaque sat on a velvet stand, waiting. It read Marcus Bell, Platinum Sponsor. Nobody at Table 1 had noticed it yet. Nobody had noticed the empty stool at the bar either, or the man sitting on it with his back straight and his water untouched, close enough to hear every word they said next. And what they said next would end up on 11 million phone screens by breakfast. Grant's voice carried the way only the voices of men who have never been told to lower it can carry. "You should have seen his face," he told Owen, leaning back in his chair, like a kid caught sneaking into first class. "Where do they even find the nerve?" Owen chuckled. "That's the real problem with these events," Paula said, adjusting her earrings in the reflection of her champagne glass. "They let anyone off the street in now. Last year it was some woman claiming to be a poet. This year, it's—" She tilted her chin toward the bar without turning to look. "Whatever that was." "Did he actually argue with you?" Denise leaned in. "He tried," Grant smirked, said he was invited. "Can you imagine? I half expected him to pull out food stamps." The table erupted. Not laughter exactly. More like performance. The sound of people confirming to each other that they were right and someone else was less. 40 feet away, Marcus heard every syllable. He didn't turn around. He lifted his water and took one slow sip. His hand was steady. His pulse was not. At table 2, a venture investor named Preston Vale, CEO of Meridian Ventures, and a man who had built an entire career reading rooms for a living, watched Grant with narrowed eyes. He didn't know who the man at the bar was. But he knew exactly what arrogance looked like at a charity gala, and he knew it was the specific kind of stupidity that leaves scars. He set his phone flat on the tablecloth, camera pointed at table 1, screen dimmed to nearly black, and pressed record. Back at table 1, Paula wasn't finished. "You know what really bothers me," she said, lowering her voice to a register that carried anyway. "It's the entitlement. People like that see a ballroom and think proximity is the same thing as belonging. Put on a suit from a discount rack, and suddenly they think they're one of us." "They'll never be one of us," Owen said. "It's not about money," Denise added. "It's about breeding. Some people," Grant said slowly, nodding like a man delivering wisdom, "are just built for the back of the room. It's in their blood." The words drifted through the ballroom like smoke, invisible to the people producing it, suffocating to everyone breathing it in. At the bar, Marcus's jaw tightened. His knuckles went white around the glass. For a single moment, something older than rage flickered behind his eyes. Something carved into the bones of every man who has ever been told, in 100 quiet and unquiet ways, that the room he is standing in will never belong to him. He set the glass down. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "James," he said, low and even, "pull the Solara Dynamics term sheet. Do not send the signature page. Hold everything until you hear from me directly." His chief legal officer paused on the other end. "Marcus, that's a $210 million deal. The board is expecting confirmation by 9 a.m. Monday. What happened?" "Hold it," Marcus said and ended the call. He locked the phone and set it face down on the bar. The decision took 4 seconds. 4 seconds to freeze $210 million. 4 seconds that would rewrite the future of every single person sitting at table 1. And not one of them was watching the bar. They were too busy watching each other. Mirrors reflecting mirrors, wealth admiring wealth, cruelty congratulating cruelty, across a tablecloth stained faintly with spilled champagne. On stage, a technician tested the microphone. Backstage, the evening's host, a former news anchor named Vivian Marsh, reviewed her cue cards. The third card read Platinum Sponsor Introduction. Marcus Bell, Bell Horizon Capital. Table 1. She frowned, peered through the curtain gap toward Table 1, and counted 8 guests, none of them matching the photo clipped to her press packet. She flagged a stagehand. "Where's our platinum sponsor? He's supposed to be seated right there." "He got moved," the stagehand shrugged. "Simon relocated him about 20 minutes ago." Vivian's expression went hard as flint, moved. She picked up her phone. Back in the ballroom, Paula refreshed her lipstick in a compact mirror. "I hope the auction pieces are better this year. Last year's centerpiece was hideous." Grant, meanwhile, glanced at an unread email from his chief financial officer, Oscar Lin, subject line reading Series C, urgent, investor status. He assumed it was routine and swiped it away, telling himself he'd read it after the speeches, after the applause, after he'd been photographed at the table where he believed he belonged. He never opened that email. He should have. Inside it, 7 words were waiting that would have changed everything Grant Ashworth did over the next 10 minutes. The investor is already in the room. But Grant didn't read it. He was too busy enjoying the reflection of his own champagne glass, too busy basking in the afterglow of having humiliated a stranger by the color of his skin and the price tag of his suit. The house lights dimmed. A hush rolled through the ballroom, the way a tide pulls back before a wave. Vivian Marsh stepped into the spotlight. 400 faces turned forward, glasses set down on white linen in near-perfect unison. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "welcome to the 24th Annual Ashcroft Foundation Charity Gala." Polite applause rippled through the room, rehearsed and synchronized. At table 1, Grant straightened his tie. Paula tilted her chin to her photo-ready angle, perfected across 2 decades of galas and magazine covers. They looked for one final moment like people who had never once made a mistake in their lives. At the bar, Marcus turned his stool to face the stage. His hands rested on his knees. His breathing was slow and even, the particular patience of a man who knows exactly what is coming and has decided to let it arrive on its own schedule. "Before we begin tonight's program," Vivian said, "I want to recognize the person whose extraordinary generosity made this entire evening possible." Grant sat up a little straighter, already assuming it was someone from his circle, someone he could shake hands with later. "Our platinum sponsor this year," Vivian continued, and paused, the exact kind of pause that makes 400 people lean forward in their seats, "is a man who grew up in a 2-room apartment in Memphis, raised by a single mother who worked 26 years of night shifts as a nurse. A man who was rejected by 26 investment firms before he built one of the most respected funds in the country." Grant's smile flickered. Something cold slid down through his chest, though he didn't yet know why. A man who today manages over $420 million in assets and who tonight made the single largest individual donation in the 24-year history of the Ashcroft Foundation. Paula's hand tightened around Grant's forearm hard enough to leave 4 small crescents in the fabric of his sleeve. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian said, "Mr. Marcus Bell, founder and chief executive of Bell Horizon Capital." The screen behind her erupted with light. A photograph filled the frame, 6 feet wide, sharp enough to count the threads of the navy suit. The face on that screen belonged to the man they had shoved out of their own chairs less than 20 minutes earlier. The ballroom exploded into applause, 400 pairs of hands clapping in unison. But at table 1, the air turned to concrete. Grant's fingers curled inward against the tablecloth like something dying. Paula's champagne glass tilted in her grip, and a thin stream of it ran down her wrist and pooled on the linen. She didn't notice. She couldn't blink. Owen's mouth hung open. Denise pressed both palms flat against the table as if the floor had shifted underneath her chair. At table 2, Preston Vale lowered his phone and smiled. He had everything he needed. Vivian looked toward table 1 and found the seat empty. Then she looked toward the bar. "Mr. Bell," she said into the microphone, "would you please join us on stage?" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fill a room, but crushes it flat. 400 people turned in their chairs. 400 necks craned toward the man whose name now blazed 6 feet tall on the screen behind the podium. Marcus set his glass down on the bar. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. The same jacket Paula had called a discount rack costume, the same one she'd wiped her armrest to avoid touching, and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted, not because anyone stepped aside, but because everyone leaned back. The way people lean back when they realize they've been standing far too close to something they should have respected from the very start. His footsteps echoed now. The same thick carpet that had swallowed his retreat 20 minutes earlier amplified his return. Every step said the same thing without a single word. I was here. You removed me. And now I'm back. He climbed 3 steps to the stage. Vivian handed him the microphone. He didn't speak right away. He stood at the podium and looked out over 400 faces. The same chandeliers, the same gold leaf ceiling, the same perfumed air. But everything about the room had changed in the span of 30 seconds. Thank you, Vivian, he said finally. His voice was calm and measured, the exact same voice that had said, I have a place card 20 minutes earlier. The same voice Grant had interrupted and mocked and dismissed without a second thought. I was seated at table 1 this evening. He paused, letting the sentence sit in the air like a match held over gasoline, but I was asked to leave. A murmur rippled through the room, not shock yet, just confusion, the first hairline crack in the dam. I was told I didn't belong there. Another pause. I was told this table, this room, was not built for people like me. The murmur swelled into something louder. Heads turned toward table 1 in a single collective motion, and Grant felt every one of those 400 gazes land on him at once, each one a separate weight pressing down on his shoulders. The color drained from his face. The Rolex on his wrist suddenly felt like it weighed 40 pounds. I was called trash, Marcus said. I was told I should be parking cars outside. I was put out of my chair twice, in front of everyone at that table. Paula's breath caught somewhere in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. The moment she had called priceless 20 minutes ago now played, behind her eyes like a horror film she couldn't turn off. I was told, Marcus said quietly, that some people are just built for the back of the room, that it's in their blood. He looked directly at Grant, not with anger, not with triumph, with something far heavier than either, pity, the particular kind reserved for a man who has just destroyed himself and doesn't yet understand the size of the wreckage. I don't believe that about anyone, Marcus said. I never have. The ballroom went silent again, but it was a different silence this time, not polite, not waiting for a punchline. It was the airless, suffocating silence of 400 people realizing they had just watched an injustice unfold in real time, and not one of them had stood up. Marcus set the microphone down gently, the way you set down something you no longer need, and walked off the stage. The applause began a moment later, not from table 1, not from the front rows, but from the back of the room, from Talia Nguyen standing near the service entrance, clapping until her palms burned. Then table 14 joined in, then table 9. Then the entire ballroom rose in a wave that crashed against the marble walls, like a verdict delivered by 400 jurors at once. At table 1, Grant sat frozen, his yacht story dead on his lips, his phone buzzing in his pocket with Oscar Lynn's 4th missed call. Paula stared at the empty stage, one tear sliding down her cheek. It wasn't remorse. It was calculation. She was already trying to compute how to survive whatever was coming next. She couldn't have. Because what was coming next had no formula, no fix, and no exit. The applause was still echoing when Grant bolted from his chair and moved through the ballroom like a man fleeing a fire he had set himself, his shoes sliding on the marble, his shoulder catching the edge of table 6 as he stumbled past. He found Marcus in the corridor outside the ballroom, straightening his cuffs, checking his phone. Please, Grant said, breathless. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Marcus didn't look up right away. He finished typing, locked his phone, and raised his eyes. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Ashworth. I didn't know who you were. If I had known. That's exactly the problem, Marcus said, his voice level, the kind of quiet that fills a hallway more completely than any shout ever could. You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to treat me like a human being. And you couldn't manage that. Grant's mouth opened and closed with nothing coming out of it. His rehearsed charm, his boardroom handshake, his golf course closing pitch, all of it had evaporated like water on a hot skillet. For the first time in 52 years, Grant Ashworth had absolutely nothing useful to say. Paula caught up behind him, her gown whispering against the marble, her mascara freshly reapplied, but her hands visibly trembling. "Mr. Bell, I want to sincerely apologize," she started. "You called me a thing," Marcus said, without raising his voice, without blinking. "You told security to remove this thing from the VIP section. You wiped down your chair with a handkerchief after I sat in it. You told a room full of strangers I was contaminating the air." Paula's lips parted. Nothing came out. Behind her, 3 guests who had followed the commotion into the corridor stood watching, one of them holding a phone at chest height, quietly recording every word. "I didn't mean." "You meant every word of it," Marcus said. "The only thing you didn't intend was saying it to someone who could hold you accountable for it." Grant stepped forward, hand outstretched, not to shake but to grip, the reflex of a man who believed any crisis could be solved by seizing it hard enough. "Listen, whatever it takes, we'll make this right. Solara Dynamics, we're already in your pipeline, aren't we? Renegotiate tonight. Board seats, equity adjustments, preferred returns, name your price." Marcus looked at the outstretched hand and didn't take it. The Series C is dead. 4 words. They landed on Grant like a dropped ceiling. "You can't," he said, staggering backward until his shoulder hit the wall. "That's $210 million. Without that funding, the company goes under. You should have thought of that before you put your hands on me twice," Marcus said, and turned toward the elevator, his footsteps unhurried, the walk of a man who had made his decision 20 minutes earlier and felt no need to explain it a second time. Simon Reyes appeared in the corridor a moment later, clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield, his face the color of wet concrete. "Mr. Ashworth," he said, "I've been instructed by the Foundation's board to ask you and Mrs. Ashworth to leave the premises effective immediately." "Leave." Paula's voice pitched high enough to crack against the marble. "We donated $340,000 to this foundation." "Yes, ma'am," Simon said, swallowing hard. "And Mr. Bell donated $1.4 million tonight." The number landed on Paula like a collapsing ceiling. She reached for the wall, fingers scraping cold marble and finding nothing to hold on to. Grant's phone buzzed again. He answered with numb fingers. "Grant." Oscar Lynn's voice was tight, barely controlled. "Please tell me you did not do what I think you did." "Nathan." "Oscar, listen. It's already everywhere." Preston Vale posted a video 11 minutes ago. 40,000 views and climbing. Every single word you said at that table. CNBC's press line has already called twice. Grant fumbled his phone open with shaking hands. The hashtag Gala table racism was climbing fast. 12 minutes old and already 9th trending in the state of Georgia. The video showed everything. The shoving, the laughing, the food stamp comment, Owen's line about breeding, Paula wiping the armrest in slow motion, subtitles running white across the bottom of the screen for anyone with the sound off. The caption above the clip read, "Tech CEO and wife humiliate black investor at charity gala. He was funding their company." 42,000 views. 50,000. 60. The counter climbed like a fever nobody could break. Grant lowered the phone and looked at Paula. She looked back at him. For the first time in 21 years of marriage, neither one of them had a single plan. By sunrise, the video had crossed 13 million views. It ran on every platform, clipped, remixed, subtitled in 14 languages, slowed down frame by frame on the exact moment Paula's handkerchief touched the armrest. A remix set Grant's built for the back of the room line to a trap beat and passed 2 million views of its own before most of the country had finished breakfast. The morning shows led with it. One network ran a Chiron reading tech CEO humiliates black investor at charity gala. didn't know he was funding his own company. A national paper published an opinion piece by noon under the headline "The VIP Table and the Myth of Merit." Gala table racism hit #1, trending in the country by 9 a.m. By 10, it was trending worldwide. A second hashtag, #KnowYourPlace, climbed right alongside it. A third, #MarcusBell, cracked the top 5. At Solara Dynamics headquarters, the damage was already structural. Oscar Lin had been fielding calls since 4 in the morning. 3 of the company's existing investors delivered the identical message before the markets even opened. "We're withdrawing. We cannot be associated with this. Pull our name off every document by end of business." By 11 a.m., Solara had lost not only the $210 million round from Bell Horizon, but an additional $88 million in prior commitments that evaporated within hours. The stock opened down 19% and closed the day down 43%, erasing $331 million of market value in a single trading session. The board convened an emergency session at 2 p.m. 7 members sat around a glass conference table on the 31st floor. Grant and Paula were not invited to attend. They were the agenda. The board chair, a 71-year-old attorney named Margaret Voss, opened the meeting with 4 words: "This is beyond repair." The vote came back unanimous, 7-0. Grant Ashworth was removed as chief executive. Paula Ashworth was removed as chief operating officer. Both were stripped of their board seats before the meeting adjourned. A statement went out an hour later, written in language precise enough to have come from a surgeon. Solara Dynamics condemns all forms of discrimination and has accepted the immediate resignations of its co-founders, effective today. Resignations, not terminations. The board gave them the word as a courtesy. Everyone who read it understood exactly what it meant. Grant received the call at 3:15, sitting in the living room of their townhouse, still wearing the previous night's suit, unslept, unshowered, refreshing the view counter on his phone like it was a timer on a bomb. He had no idea how to defuse. "You can't do this," he said into the phone. "I built this company. Every line of code, every client, every Grant." Margaret's voice was flat and final. "You built a company that is now worth $331 million less than it was yesterday, because you could not manage to treat a black man with basic decency at a dinner table. The board's decision is final. Your vesting is frozen. Legal will reach out regarding separation terms." The line went dead. Paula's reckoning arrived through a different channel. She filmed a 3-minute apology video in the townhouse kitchen, tears carefully staged, her voice trembling at exact rehearsed intervals, and posted it at 4 p.m. It lasted 41 minutes before the internet tore it apart at the seams. "She's crying because she got caught, not because she's sorry," one comment read, gathering 16,000 likes within the hour. "Notice she never says what she actually did," another read. "Just mistakes were made. Passive voice classics." 11,000 likes. A third comment simply said, "The handkerchief. I can't get past the handkerchief." 26,000 likes and climbing. By evening, someone had spliced the moment Paula dabbed a tissue at her eye, directly against the footage of her wiping the armrest with silk, captioned "Same energy." It went viral inside the hour, its own meme within 2. Simon Reyes was terminated by the Ashcroft Foundation at 5 p.m. His severance was minimal, his reference letter non-existent. He had spent 13 years managing galas, donor relations, seating charts, and he had never once refused a request from a major donor in all that time. That obedience, the thing he had always mistaken for professionalism, turned out to be exactly what ended his career. The legal fallout arrived within the week. Marcus's attorneys filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Commission on Civil Rights, citing public humiliation, discriminatory conduct, and forced removal from a ticketed event on the basis of race. The complaint named Grant Ashworth, Paula Ashworth, and the Ashcroft Foundation as respondents. Civil rights attorney Renata Cole, a former federal prosecutor with 2 decades of discrimination litigation behind her, held a press conference on the steps of the commission building. "What happened to Marcus Bell is not an isolated incident," she said. "It is a pattern of assumption, of prejudice, of casual cruelty, dressed up as social protocol. The only difference this time is that the man they targeted had the resources to fight back. Most people don't. That's exactly why this case matters." The Ashcroft Foundation settled within 12 days. Terms were not disclosed publicly, but sources close to the negotiation confirmed a 7-figure payment to a civil rights education fund of Marcus's choosing, a public apology delivered by the foundation's board chair, and a mandatory anti-discrimination training program for every staff member and volunteer going forward. Grant and Paula did not settle. Their own attorneys advised them to. They refused, believing even then, even after everything, that their name and their connections could still buy them a way out. It couldn't. The commission ruled against them within 60 days. The fine was substantial, the public record was permanent, and the court of public opinion, the one with no appeals process and no statute of limitations, had already delivered its verdict. The moment Preston Vale pressed record at Table 2. 9 months later, Marcus Bell stood at a podium in a packed auditorium at Georgia Tech. 380 students, faculty, and tech executives filled every seat. Cameras lined the back wall. A banner hung behind the stage reading Eleanor Bridge Fund launch event. The fund was real. $52 million committed exclusively to Black and Latino founders building technology companies. No pedigree required, no country club membership. Just an idea, a plan, and the willingness to work harder than anyone thought possible. He'd built it in 7 months, pulling capital from his own portfolio, recruiting 4 co-investors, hiring a team of 14 people who had all, at one point or another, been told no by the exact same institutions that had once told him no. He looked out over the audience and spoke without notes. "When I was 23, he said, I pitched my first business plan to a bank in Memphis." The loan officer didn't read past the first page. He looked at me, looked at the plan, and said, "Maybe try something more realistic." I pitched 25 more times after that. 25 more versions of the same answer. Not because the plan was bad, because the person holding it didn't look like the person they expected to see holding it. He paused, let the words settle over the room. 9 months ago, I was pushed out of a chair at a charity gala. I was told I didn't belong. I was told to know my place. He looked down at the podium, then back up. I know exactly where my place is. It's right here. Building the table nobody built for me. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't gala applause. It was the kind that starts in the chest and breaks through the hands before the brain has time to decide whether it wants to join in. In the third row, a 20-year-old computer science major named Jasmine Nguyen clapped until her palms stung. Her mother, Talia, sat beside her wearing a dress she'd bought with her own money. No borrowing, no gift. And her hands trembled the way they always did when she was fighting not to cry in public. Jasmine had received a full scholarship from the Eleanor Bridge Fund 6 months earlier. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Talia read it 3 times before she believed it, then sat on the kitchen floor and cried for 20 minutes straight. Jasmine was now studying AI ethics under one of the department's leading researchers. She'd published her first paper 2 weeks prior. The title was Bias in Automated Decision Systems: Who Gets a Seat at the Table. It wasn't a coincidence, and when Marcus eventually read it, he would sit at his desk in the same 1-bedroom apartment above the laundromat he'd never bothered to leave, hold his mother's watch in one hand, and think about a woman who worked night shifts so her son could learn to read a balance sheet at a kitchen table in Memphis. Some people build empires to be seen. Marcus Bell built his so that other people would never have to feel invisible. Grant and Paula Ashworth filed for divorce 4 months after the gala. Their townhouse sold for $3.8 million, $1.1 million less than they'd paid for it 3 years earlier. Grant took a consulting role at a mid-sized firm in New Jersey, the kind of job nobody remembers the name of. His name stopped coming up at industry events entirely. Not with anger, which would have at least meant people still cared enough to be angry. Worse than that, with nothing at all. But something in Grant did change, slower than anyone expected, and later than it should have. 14 months after the gala, a business journalist working on a retrospective piece about corporate accountability tracked him down for comment. Grant agreed to the interview, which surprised even his own attorney. He sat in a rented office in Newark and, for the first time on any public record, said the words out loud. "I told myself for months it was about protocol, about donor tiers, about who belonged where." He looked at his hands for a long moment before he continued. "That was a lie I built to protect myself from what I actually did. I looked at a man and decided, before he opened his mouth, exactly what he was worth. I was wrong about him, and I was wrong about what kind of man that made me." The article ran under the headline, "What Privilege Costs," and it was the only piece of press coverage Grant Ashworth ever asked to have shared rather than buried. Paula published a memoir 8 months after the divorce titled Unlearning Privilege. It sold modestly, and the reviews were mixed, most of them agreeing on one point, that she understood, finally, what she had lost, but still seemed to be circling the edges of what she had actually done to earn that loss. She never gave the interview. Grant gave. Some people learn the lesson. Some people only learn to talk about learning it. Solara Dynamics survived under new leadership. Its new chief executive, a woman named Patricia Cole, who had spent 17 years in enterprise AI before taking the role, restructured the company from the ground up, secured fresh funding within 4 months, and doubled its revenue inside a single year. Nobody in the industry missed the irony, and nobody bothered pointing it out loud, because by then it didn't need to be said. Talia Nguyen still works catering events on the weekends, though these days it's mostly because she likes the people she works with, not because she has to. Bell Horizon Capital quietly covers her daughter's tuition through graduation. Nobody outside the two families knows that. Marcus asked that it stay that way. And somewhere in Memphis, in a modest cemetery, 2 miles from the hospital, where she worked 26 years of night shifts, there's a small stone with the name Eleanor Bell carved into it. Marcus visits twice a year. He doesn't bring flowers. He brings the watch, sets it on the grass beside the stone for exactly 1 minute, then puts it back on his wrist and drives home. So here's the question this story leaves behind. If you had been sitting at that table, not the one that shoved a stranger out of his chair, but one of the other tables, watching it happen, saying nothing, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent the way almost everyone in that ballroom did? Be honest with yourself. And if this story found something true in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible either. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever been in that room? And which side of the table were you standing on? I read every single one.